This month's podcasts are sponsored by Aubergine Legal. Do you sometimes worry that your business isn't meeting all its legal compliance requirements and wonder if you're ticking all the legal boxes? Are you losing sleep worrying about a piece of legislation that you may or may not be complying with? Perhaps you need some help with your client contracts or your data protection compliance. Or maybe you're worried that your website doesn't have the right documents or legal notices in the right place. Perhaps you have a brand that you want to protect with a trademark. How about if you could outsource it all and eliminate all of your worries? If so, then get in touch with Aubergine Legal, a friendly commercial legal consultancy offering practical and clear commercial legal advice without the overwhelming legal jargon, taking the worry away and helping you to protect your business and minimise your risks. Aubergine offers a free 30-minute consultation if you have any questions or want to find out if they can help, and you can access this link and book your free 30-minute call via the link in the show notes. Welcome to the Bring Your Product Idea to Life podcast. This is the podcast for you if you're getting started selling products or if you'd like to create your own product to sell. I'm Vicky Weinberg, a product creation coach and Amazon expert. Every week I share friendly, practical advice as well as inspirational stories from small businesses. Let's get started. Today on the podcast, I'm really excited to speak to Cara Bendon. Cara is a branding consultant. She's been on the podcast before. Cara joined me in episode 80, which ironically is before this podcast was rebranded. And we spoke on that episode about a lot of the visual elements that make up your branding. So if you haven't listened to that episode already, so that's episode 80, I think it'd be great if you could pause now and go back and listen to that, because today very much builds on what we spoke about in that episode. So that episode was a lot about the visual things, so the parts of your brand that people see. And today we're talking a lot about the things that lie beneath the surface, and the things that aren't so visible. So that, brand values, how you tell the story of your brand, what the customer experience is like, all those kind of things. So it's a great conversation and we share loads of examples. Hopefully this will be one that really gets you thinking about what you could do differently with your brand. And I would love now to introduce you to Cara. So hi Cara, thank you for joining me again.
Hi, I'm so pleased to be back. Thanks for inviting me.
So hopefully everyone has already listened to your previous episode, but just in case, and it was a while ago now, can you just remind us of who you are and what you do, please?
Yes, absolutely. So my name's Cara and I run a small agency called the Cara Bendon Brand Consultancy, where I offer branding for product businesses, specifically those who are quite ambitious and they have a vision for their brand. They've created something quite innovative and they want to see it out there in the world.
Brilliant. Thank you. So today is definitely going to be a progression from what we spoke about last time. But the one thing I would like you to recap on, if you don't mind, Cara, is why a strong brand is so important.
Absolutely. Well, today's topic also covers elements that contribute to a strong brand, but the other episode is a really good starting point because the two just can't exist without harmony between them. So the visual elements of a brand tell the story of everything underneath and the brand foundation. And that's what we're going to be talking about a bit today. But essentially, your brand is your first impression. It's how people perceive you in the world. So it's really important.
It's really interesting. You said that there's lots more than the visible elements. So that's really cool. And let's talk about that a bit later because I'd like to dive into that. The first thing I'd like to ask you about, Cara, is I know that you talk about something called the 5 Ws. Do you want to tell us what they are and how they inform and make up your brand?
Absolutely. So one of my principles in my business is about simplifying branding and not using too much jargon and making it complicated, because honestly, I don't believe it is. At the heart of branding, it's about creating a connection with a human. And in the case of small businesses, it's a very human to human connection. So the 5 Ws, are often used in other situations. And so I thought it was a helpful framework for people to think about their brand foundation. So that would just be who, what, why, where, and when. So in the case of your brand, it's making clear that people can understand who are you. So your story, the founder, what do you sell? It sounds obvious, but it needs to be immediately apparent and clear to people across your communications, your website, your brand. Why should I buy from you? And that is one that's really loaded with meaning that we'll extrapolate on a little bit when we talk about brand values. But that's really about, making your brand compelling to consumers for specific reasons. Where can I get it? That's obviously more like a call to action. And then when could be, when is this relevant for me? So I find that quite interesting when you think about when is your product relevant to someone in their life. That's interesting in terms of it forms your tone of voice, your language that you use, the content you put out, but also the point at which you market to people. For example, if you had a nutritional supplement that was really good for women in pregnancy, you would need to think about exactly when it's right to meet your audience with that message, how to meet your audience at the point that they're at. Is it that you start much earlier, or for example, if you were just to put up adverts in nurseries, it could be a little bit late for that particular baby, so it's thinking about that. And when can I get it? So the other side of when could just be, for online consumers, especially, the when can I get it can actually become quite an important part of your brand. I mean, even if we look at Amazon, that was one of the USPs that they had, 15, 20 years ago when e-commerce was much newer. It was that you could get these books and you could get them within 2-3 days, sometimes 24 hours. And with Prime, that's their promise. So that can in itself become a core part of your brand.
Thank you so much for explaining all of that. I think these are really good questions to maybe ask yourself if you're thinking about your brand and all that goes into it. You mentioned earlier, Cara, that there's a lot more about the brand than what we see. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what you mean? Because in the last episode, we spoke a lot about the visual things. We spoke about colours and logos and all of that. So what are the areas that are underneath the surface that we as consumers may not see, but as brands we need to be thinking about?
Absolutely. So branding is actually only the visible component of everything your brand is. So in terms of the branding, we often think, sometimes we confuse it with being brand, and we say, oh, I've got a logo, I've got some colors, so I've got my brand done. But actually, if we haven't got those in understanding of our USP, the story behind the business, the values, then actually that branding is going to be relatively generic and not as powerful. So by combining the two together, you have a strong brand foundation. So one of the things I like to say is that your logo is a little like your signature. So your signature is really important. It's something that's used on legal documents. You might use it on your credit card. It is, to all intents and purposes, a legal representation of your approval, but it isn't you. It's just a small bit of handwriting that may be quite hard for people to read depending on your handwriting. It's not all of you. And that's the same with your logo. It's really important. It's a recognizable thing that people will, gain brand awareness and be able to identify from afar in many different situations. However, it's not all of your brand. And if you lean too much on just having a logo, then you risk not really having that strong brand. So the other visual elements of branding are your website, your packaging. Maybe you have certain brand textures or elements or shapes. You might have a bespoke brand pattern. You might have a tagline for which your brand is connected or famous for. And, it might be, then that might show up in things like your social media, your website, your packaging, your business cards, etc. But all of that is your branding, and it needs to reflect the invisible elements. So if we were to think of this as an iceberg, all of that is what's visible, and it should go to represent everything under the water, which is your brand values, your tone of voice, your positioning in the market. So by that, it's like whether you're luxury, whether you're mid-premium, whether you are sort of super affordable, whether you're fair trade, where you position yourself in the market, how that relates to your product prices, your audience. it's like I said before, it's your founder story, and I'm particularly keen on that. Why did your business come into being in the first place? What problem was it that you were trying to solve? Because that's an incredibly compelling part of the brand's piece. And another thing that I would include in that iceberg is actually your customer service and the customer experience that they have with you, because that whole experience is going to be reflective of your brand in terms of reputation and word of mouth. But it's absolutely nothing to do with your color choices or logo. So as you can see, it's like the elements on the top should reflect everything underneath. So if you had a brand that, it was key to your brand to want to bring joy to people's lives, and you might have like brightly colored, playful graphics that would make sense for that value.
That makes sense. Thank you so much. And you've mentioned so many things there that I'd love to dig into a bit deeper. And I think what you're saying, and tell me if I've misunderstood, is that if you know what your brand is, who your customers are, so as you say, whether you're a brand that brings joy or you're a brand that supports people through tough times or whatever it is, I guess that then can inform the visual elements of your brand. Because let's say you are, in the example you just gave, if you're a brand and that wants to bring joy to people, you probably wouldn't have a very dark, somber visual appearance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, on the flip side, if you wanted to be a brand that was all about luxury, then perhaps you would choose dark colors, and you might have sort of metallic elements or traditional serif fonts, something to create a sense of, like, if you were a luxury brand, you might model it a little after some hotels where they're quite aspirational and a little bit moody and maybe a bit seductive. And it's got to suit your brand. And yeah, exactly. It relates to those values, positioning, and brand personality.
That makes a lot of sense. And as we're talking, I'm kind of reflecting on everything you're saying, and it's making me think about times where I've definitely seen brands or websites in particular, I think I've seen this on websites, where the visuals don't feel like they match with the products or the what the person is selling, or maybe how they're doing it. And I can't think of an example, even if I did, I wouldn't want to share because that would be really unkind. But
yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I've definitely had that experience where I've gone onto a site and there's felt a little bit of a disconnect between maybe the products. It's mainly products where I've seen products, and then I look at the overall branding on this website, for example, and I feel like, oh, this kind of jars a little bit. And I'm wondering if this is an example of where maybe the visual elements have come first ahead of the rest of the business.
It could be, or it could also be that trap that sometimes people fall into of thinking that professionalism can't allow for brand expression, that personality, that in order to look, that things have to look a certain way. And obviously professionalism of your branding is one thing, but it looking a certain way is actually the opposite of that, because then that just means everything looks the same. It's very generic and it doesn't say anything specific. I'm all about getting to the heart of the business and trying to communicate that. And actually, it reminds me, you and I were both at a trade show, and we saw the Positive Planner guys, and their brand, I think, really conveys their values so well. They always have these bright colors, and it's a relatively serious subject matter, mental health, but they're all about, and they're not about toxic positivity, but they are about being uplifting and bringing joy into your life. So all of their product range is really bright colors. And even when we saw them in person, they were both in jumpsuits with yellow Converse, weren't they? And that was just like a subtle nod to the bright yellow of their brand. They were perfectly on brand as well. They were really cheerful. And, so it was an embodiment of those values that came through those colors in their brand.
Yeah, I remember that experience as well, because it was really memorable for me, because partly how they were dressed, but also, like you said, they really embodied their brand. And it felt really what they were selling felt really authentic because of how they came across. So I think that is a really good example, because I do remember speaking with them and it kind of made total sense what they were selling and why. And and also when we will talk about this in a moment, but they were talking to us, maybe you remember, about the story of the brand as well. And I think that can really help connect, can't it? If you know the story of a founder and of a brand, that can really help you as a customer sort of get it.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the most powerful things. I think that understanding somebody's journey and then, why they create a product, it makes it so much more memorable, and it makes it a more interesting option than others if you have alternative options for a given thing. So I met a lady, I've forgotten her name right now, unfortunately, but founder of a business called Zip Us In, and at an event. And what it was is that when she was pregnant through the winter and didn't want to buy a special maternity or extra large winter coat when she, that's not in line with her values of having a more capsule wardrobe, buying things that you're going to wear for years, not just having throwaway items. And so she devised this insert that could just be clipped in, and it extends the coat so that around your stomach, or afterwards if you are wearing the baby in a carrier. And for me, it's those stories, you see them a lot on Dragon's Den and shows like that really stick in your mind and make you remember that. And that's a business I have very much kept in my mind for that reason.
Absolutely. That's the whole point of this podcast, really, is that I love hearing founder stories, because everyone has a story, even if they think they don't. And I think there's something just nice about kind of knowing who the founder is and having a face to that person. You and I were talking recently about a brand, and we don't need to name the brand, where we were saying it felt quite strange that we don't know much about them and why the product came into existence and who's actually behind it. And that for me, I don't know, it's a product that I love, but I feel like I can't get behind the brand because I don't know who they are.
I know what you mean. That specific one. I was looking everywhere for some personal story on the About page, and the About page just had some, very relevant information for the audience, but I just couldn't get a sense of the origin story, who had created this product. Because as you say, it's a really clever product. So I think that, the story is a key part of it.
And what about brand values? I mean, how do they play in, and so talk us about how and why they're important, and also how we might share them as well.
Well, absolutely. So I think brand values have always been an important piece, but actually the way things are going, it's gaining momentum and becoming even more crucial. I think I have some stats from a report, but it's from 2019, and that's pre-pandemic. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's actually increased. But at that time, 72% of consumers would decide whether to buy from a brand based on their values. And I think the pandemic had no small effect on our sense of disconnection from the world, that then increased our desire to feel that we had a human connection through the brands we buy from. It was a time where all our interactions were turned on their head and were basically diminished, and that our behaviors were turned on their head, and we were e-commerce was the only kind of shopping. And we also saw a rise in makers and creators and entrepreneurs in that time being resourceful and inventive with solutions. So we have at the same time, a great increase in entrepreneurialism and small businesses, at the same time as a desire to have more human connection and maybe buy from businesses that have more of a personal story, more independent, more ethical, more values-led. So the values now, it's something you can't really escape. The big boys are being held to account when they greenwash, when they put out statements, when they support International Women's Day with graphics, but not with actions. People see through that now. But one thing that I've always noticed is that the small business landscape, independent businesses, especially really small companies, are absolutely leading the way with being values-led and authentic in that way. So you see these businesses being sustainable from the word go. You see them supporting, different types of people, accessibility from the word go, instead of just putting across a blanket statement about their action towards this, like some of the bigger companies do. And, basically today's consumer wants to know that their money is making a difference in the world, wants to know that they're supporting companies that are ethically good, or at least aren't corrupt. And basically the landscape of our world now, we vote with our wallets.
That makes sense. And I think what's interesting about what you're saying is, I think it's much more about what you do than what you say as well. And that's something I just picked up on, because you're right, there has been, it feels like every other week there's another greenwashing story in the press. Don't shop here because they say this, but they do that. But I think what you do is almost more powerful than what you say. So I don't think this is necessarily about having a page on your website that says these are our brand values, because you can kind of show what your values are for your actions. And I think that's always almost more powerful. So, for example, I recently shopped somewhere, and then after I placed the order, I got an email that said, "Thank you for your order. We've planted one tree." Because I hadn't actually seen on the website that they did that. Quite possibly it said that, but it wasn't immediately obvious. But when I got the email saying about the tree, I was like, I felt quite happy, and I thought that was a nice, and it felt that kind of gave me an impression of the kind of company that they were.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. That's really nice. And yes, my opinion is that a value is nothing without a commitment. So I always challenge my clients, if we're doing some values work, that they think about how they are committing or can commit to that, what action they can take. But I think for small businesses as well, it's not like the onus is on you to completely change the world. You've also, you've got to make money, but it's how you do that in a way that is true to your values is really important. So sustainability is one that, is really high on the agenda at the moment, and it's very important to me as well. But that's getting all of the attention, as it were. But your values can also contain things that are quite specific to you, and I think that's actually a place that brands can stand out a bit as well. Because if they have these values, for example, it might be that they want the founder story relates to mental health, and their value is to always, support mental health of their team. And then their action is that anybody can call on the morning of a day they're supposed to work and say, I need a mental health day, or whatever it might be, rather than just lip service to it. If that's something that they could do through their business, or if it's a one-man band and that's the commitment, then it's about being true to that in terms of, okay, it might be charitable contributions to a charity that would support mental health, but it also could be about having a pillar of content that shares things about mental health, and encourages that as something within the brand itself, within other posts such as self-care or meditation or movement. Because actually it doesn't always have to be, who do I write a check for in order to prove this value. It's about how are you bringing this through to your community and your audience. That's actually just as valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking about this, sort of knowing we were going to speak, and I was trying to think of some examples, because I like to shop with small businesses, and I do shop with small businesses. And a few things that I've seen sort of recently is businesses that sort of commit to only sending orders in recyclable packaging, for example. And it feels like a small thing, but it kind of demonstrates their values. Or companies that have excellent customer service, where you send an email and then you get you get a reply back within an hour. I mean, you don't need to reply that soon, but you know what I mean? You get a personalised reply that's really nice. Or I shopped from somewhere recently and they put a little chocolate bunny in with my order. So it's a really small thing, but it just gives you as a customer a really nice feeling about that brand. And I'm sure you've got tons more examples, Cara. So can we talk a little bit about that, about how you can stand out and make your customers feel as happy as I did when I got a chocolate bunny in the post?
Well, I think everyone should put a chocolate bunny in every package. But yeah, well, I think that even things like that email about the trees being planted was a good way of doing that, because and I've always liked Etsy that their packaging says that your delivery was offset, and that's nice. I mean, go back to the values just briefly. Something that occurred to me is that if so certain small businesses may have certain days that they ship things, and that may seem very contrary to our convenience society where we want things as soon as possible. But if it's very clear in the brand why they do it, and say it was to reduce carbon emissions with trips to somewhere that they could post them or whatever, or even if it was to save on man hours because it's somebody and they are balancing it alongside something else, or their mental health, then if it was communicated clearly, I think that people would come to respect that and understand that from the brand. But moving back to chocolate bunnies, I think that is a guaranteed win. But I think that any little thing that brings a little bit of charm, and it's funny you said chocolate bunnies actually, because I actually call these like Easter eggs, as in that term that you'd have for films where it's little things that are like secret in jokes, as it were, except that they're not in jokes. They're something where you're bringing a little bit of your brand to life with your customer. You're having a little bit more connection, because the relationship between brand and consumer only grows with more connections. So it's little things like I've had packaging where the tone of voice on it's been really amusing, rather than sort of having a load of excess information. It's provided the information that's required, but in a way that was a little bit more humorous. That's been quite fun. Sometimes you see it when you pick up an item and underneath it says something like "nothing to see here," and it's and actually I love Tiptree jams. It's just such a small thing, but they're minis. You get them sometimes when you go to hotels and stuff, and they all have sweet messages underneath. So things like I'm not sure exactly. I can't actually remember the message I last got, but they're always quite sweet, uplifting things. And that's just nice. It's like a complete added and unexpected extra. Nobody would look at the market of condiments and say, right, jams. In order to be a professional jam brand, we clearly, this is a requirement. It's just something extra that they've done. They've associated breakfast or jam, maybe you have jam on toast or scones. They've associated that with a little moment of joy, a moment for yourself, and they've played into that with a message. I also, a previous guest on your podcast was Be Greater shoes, the barefoot kids shoes. And I love listening to your podcast and discovering brands. It's one of my favorite things to do. But I loved when I was listening to that interview, where he was describing that he'd put a smiley face in the center of the insole of the shoes, and it was half a smiley face in each shoe. Now, for me, I was already sold. I was like, I love it. It's cheerful. It's unexpected. It doesn't affect the product in any negative way. It only brings a little bit of private joy, which is lovely. But then when I understood the reason, I was even more sold. And the reason is that it's to encourage your children to independently be able to put their shoes on the right feet, because the left and the right would join together to make a smile. So when you're laying out your shoes, the child would be able to tell whether they were the right way around, because the smile would be formed or it wouldn't. And I thought that was great. I thought not only is that something that's bringing a little bit of charm, it's actually adding value to that product. It gives it a little bit more practicality, and it's a real USP for them.
I really love that too. And I think any little added thing, and particularly when it doesn't necessarily have to cost you as a brand or be a big inconvenience. So another shoe related example, this is actually a bigger brand, but I bought my daughter some new school shoes, and they actually came in a box, and the box had like some sort of sea life patterns all over, just the standard cardboard box you get shoes in, and it was designed for the child to then color and then use to put toys in or do whatever they wanted to do with. And I just thought that was so clever, because it encourages you to keep the box rather than just recycle it immediately. You know, if your child loves colouring, or maybe I like colouring actually, it's quite a fun thing to have. I just thought that was a really nice thing that probably didn't cost them any more to produce than producing the standard box with the logo on, but it was just like a really nice little extra. And I think as a customer, it's always lovely when you get something unexpected, and it doesn't have to be a physical thing. It's like you say, even like a little message or something that just anything that makes you smile, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So I in our last conversation, we spoke about the unboxing experience a little, and we actually spoke about Beauty Pie and how they were ones that did that really well in terms of providing that experience. But also, they are a quite big company, and there's lots of smaller companies doing great stuff as well. And one thing that, in terms of the sustainability angle, something I've been giving a lot of thought to is how can you provide that unboxing experience, but still be true to that sustainability value. And I think that reusing the box is one of the best ways to do that. However, if it's covered in branding, you're unlikely to do that, even if it's a fairly sturdy box in a nice color. I know I'm not as inclined to. I mean, I might put my Christmas decorations in it, but I'm probably not as likely to have it on display. I love that example you gave, because it comes from a value. It comes from the value of sustainability and wanting people to reuse the box. It actually will probably help extend their brand awareness, because you keep the box in the house, and it gave you a good customer experience, so you're more likely to tell people about it or shop for a similar product from them again. But also the fact that it was colouring in, now obviously because that was a kid's product, that makes sense, because it was like, it's a fun activity for children to do. It provides an activity, so the parent's happy, it gives the child something to do for half an hour, whatever. But there's many other ways you could bring that in. Like, for example, a brand who had mindfulness or well-being as a goal could do something similar on a smaller scale, and that could be nice. But I think I think workshopping it and brainstorming is the way, because trying to just think, how could I do this better? How could I do this differently? What's brought me joy in the past? What works for our customer and our audience? And not just doing something just because you heard it from another brand and it sounded cool, because the opposite of that is just getting a load of paper, a load of inserts when you order something, and then actually feeling quite bad because, well, if you're like me, you put them in a drawer for a week because you think, I'll read those next time I have a coffee. And then you realize life just doesn't give you the time for that kind of thing, and they go in the recycling, and then you feel bad. So it's like, obviously you have to have some, but it's not just shoving a load of extra stuff in there for the sake of it. It's about thinking what works for your customer and your brand.
I think you're right, because also if you're just copying what someone else is doing, but there's no meaning behind it, I guess it could also feel quite inauthentic. And I can't think of a good example of this now, but I've definitely had experiences where something hasn't felt quite right. And I think that is an instance. And to be honest, I've never had this with a small business. It's mainly been with bigger businesses where I guess they've been kind of trying to emulate something they've seen small businesses do, but it doesn't work on that scale. It doesn't feel in line with the brand. Does that make sense? I wish I could think of a good example of that, but do you kind of know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I think that a consumer can sense if a brand is just trying to do what they expect, what they feel is expected. And, especially for product business owners, you're entrepreneurs most of the time. And I find that incredibly inspiring. If you're coming up with a product or a way of doing things that is better or different to how it has been done before, then that's incredibly entrepreneurial, and you can use that mindset to also approach the rest, everything about your business, and it will actually strengthen the brand. So it's like, if you're inventive about your product and then, you carry that through, it's being disruptive and saying, okay, what are the norms and how could I do this differently? And just to clarify, this is very much going above and beyond. I'm not saying that everyone needs to constantly disrupt at every level, but if you can disrupt in the way that you send things, any part of the customer journey, that in a way that relates to, your brand values, your brand personality, and your audience, then it's going to really help you stand out and be remembered. It's going to make a big impression.
You're right. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like a big thing either, does it? So we're not trying to say that everyone listening needs to go away and completely change all aspects of their business, but it might even be, switching to recyclable packaging or having packaging in your brand colours, because that's something you can do. I think it could be something really, really tiny. But I think it's thinking about what represents you and your brand.
I think it's a really good exercise to pretend you're a customer and buy your product, because if that's possible for you. But I think that because, say you've been in business 6 months or you've been in business 6 years, I don't know where the figure 6 came from, by the way. But anyway, if you to some extent, you might have disconnected from what the user experience is. And if that's the case, I mean, you can either get someone else to do it. If you can do it, that might be helpful, as long as you can just be as objective as possible and just see. And I mean, I do it sometimes. Just to see how people come across my website and things like that. You can see what one improvement could you make along that journey. Could you make things a little bit less? Could you take a little point of friction out of the customer journey in buying with you? Could you add a little bit of charm somewhere along there? Is there a brand value that you could consolidate for yourself so that you know what it is that you could try and bring into your brand? If it's all about incremental changes and progress. And if you were able to do that much, then you'd be making a huge, huge improvement.
I think that's such a great idea, because there's possibly things all of us completely overlook. So as an example of that, years ago when I had my own products business and I had a Shopify site, when someone placed an order with me, they would obviously get the email saying, thank you for your order, whatever it was. And one time a customer got that email and they replied to me, and maybe they had a question or something. And it was only when they replied, I realized how dull the email was that they got, because I'd never gone in and edited the template. This is such a small thing, but the email was something, it didn't sound like me. It was just, thank you for your order, we'll let you know. And it's whatever it was. And as soon as I realized, I just updated that with a personal email that said, hi, thanks, bye, whatever I put, and put my name on it and that kind of thing. And interestingly, after I did that, I started getting so many more replies to those emails. Just from people saying, I found it really fascinating that people were taking the time. I actually got some emails that just said, thank you for this nice email. And I was like, that's so interesting. And I completely overlooked that was something that I could impact. It was something I never thought about, didn't even realise. So I think that's a great idea.
That's it. Absolutely. Just go through the process and just even put it in your own tone of voice, your own brand colours. And, I've been guilty of this, so I'm a service business, but I have a template shop, and that's relatively new for my business. And I didn't realize that I had the same thing. I had some fairly generic looking pages for checkout. And, these things are relatively limited. I know that with Shopify and many other sites, you've got to live within the rules. It's upload a logo here, choose the color here, and that's it, But wherever there's text and wherever that text is editable, that's an opportunity to bring in a little bit of brand personality, a bit of tone of voice. I mean, you could, if you wanted, even at that point, have a little bit about your business and why that receiving that order helps, or a little bit of brand story, something like that. I mean, I know that's after the event that they've bought, but if that isn't something that you think has been communicated enough before, then why not offer it then? But so basically, just looking through and seeing where there's an opportunity to be more human in the process.
I think that's great advice. I think that being human is really important, and it really does help. To give another example, if you don't mind, is that when I obviously helped lots of people selling on Amazon, and years ago, because this isn't something you can do now, years ago, you used to be able to get some software that integrated with Amazon so that when a customer bought from you, they would get an email that was from you. So as well as getting the Amazon thank you for your order, they would also get thank you for buying for my small business. This is who I am. If you have any problems, let me know. What I found really interesting is with my clients who implemented this kind of email system, their return rate started going down because the customer then had a point of contact to go back to and say, my order hasn't arrived, or it's arrived, but this is the problem. Can you help me? So whereas previously they might have just gone onto Amazon and left a bad review, they were actually reaching out to the business because they then had that point of contact and explaining what their issues were. And then most of the time the business could then solve that issue, and it just prevented them getting a negative review or a return. And I found that super interesting. And I think it was just because, and I think this is sort of thing to think about if you're selling, even if you're selling on a platform like Amazon or Etsy or somewhere else, there's still plenty of opportunity to kind of get across who you are and a bit about your business, so it's not so faceless. Because I feel like if it feels faceless, you are more likely to perhaps leave a ruthless review, maybe.
That is exactly right. No, but that's what I was thinking when you were saying that. I think that's fascinating, but that's exactly it. I think that people, there's no emotive connection with a faceless corporation. So you buy from Amazon, you don't feel anything for or ordering too many and then returning lots or whatever it might be, because they're Amazon. You've seen in the news about them. They can take the losses, they can take the hits, whatever. But as soon as it becomes a small business that's operating a leg of their business through Amazon, then it's human. And not only have you, as you said, they can actually get in touch if it's a practical issue. But I think I wouldn't be surprised if the returns rate decreased because it felt more like a real person behind the business, and then felt more like not as disposable.
I think so. And I know we've spoken on projects that we've worked on together. We've definitely spoken about encouraging brands to actually put a bit about their business on there, maybe even a photograph of themselves, just so that people can see. As you will have seen on Amazon now, you do get, if you're a small business, you do have a small business logo. Someone knows they're buying from a small business, but you can take it that step further. You can add your brand story. You can add a photograph of yourself. You can give that background. And that's something you've been able to do for a while. I've certainly been encouraging clients to do this for a really long time, because I think it is that important that if you are on a marketplace like that where you could get lost among all the other people selling similar products, I think that's kind of a place where it's really important to make an effort to stand out.
Definitely. And if if the thought of putting your picture up on your Amazon page or on your website just terrifies you, then there is a slightly softer approach as well, which is actually when it comes to your photography, when you're getting brand photos done, try and get a few of you in the process of designing the product or making it if you're a maker, or just packaging it but in some part of doing. And therefore it doesn't have to be a complete headshot if you were really uncomfortable with that. But those pictures as well are so valuable. I mean, I've had a candle client and the hand poured candles, and that's something that we communicate through the brand, and it's part of what makes them special. They're made with really good quality waxes, etc., etc. And the number of times that I have just wished that we had more making images to be able to communicate that has it's been high. So I'd say that would be a tip as well to take away from this, is if you haven't had a photo shoot done, or you haven't had one done in a while, you've changed your hair, you look different, or it's just your photos are a little old now, then definitely, if you are considering one, then definitely get a few behind the scenes type photos, because not only can you use them on social media, but that they can be connected with your brand story on places like your about page, and they really help. People like to see people like to understand who it is that they're buying from, so they're really powerful that way.
I think you're definitely right. They are really powerful. And I know not everyone likes the idea of using like a corporate headshot. I certainly don't. When I had my brand photos done, I got some photos of me doing other stuff done for that reason. And also, I guess they can sometimes, in some instances, they can look a bit old fashioned, but as you say, if you can illustrate what you do, for example, I'm working with a company now who makes olive oil, and one of the photos they use is a photo of them in their own, is it a vineyard? In their on their orchard. It's a photo of them hand picking, basically. Yeah. It's a photo of them out there doing the picking themselves. And I think that's really nice, because not only does it show you the people, because it's a family business, it not only shows you the people working in the business, but actually shows you them working in the business. So they don't need to, they say pictures, there's 1,000 words. They don't need to tell you it's a family business and that they hand pick everything, because they've got a photo of them doing it. And I really liked that. When I went to take a look, I was like, that's really good, because it just says so much. Like, I think if you're a maker, having pictures of you making your products would be amazing.
Absolutely. So actually, it's funny, I feel like perhaps because we're recording this just before Easter, we're coming back to Easter eggs and chocolate bunnies constantly, but I feel like this is something I once called the Lindor effect to a client, because their adverts where Lindor is I'm not even sure how it's produced now, but I assume it's mass produced now. It's available in all supermarkets, very well known, but that they keep that narrative that it's made in Switzerland by chocolatiers who are wearing chef's hats and ensuring the consistency is just right before they pour it. And actually we buy on emotion. I mean, I booked restaurants for a special occasion, and I was sold because, I think my stomach even started to rumble when I looked at the pictures of them making pasta, because they were putting it through the pasta press. And it was like, yeah, that's better than just showing me, an interior with a chandelier and some wine glasses on a table, because now I know that you take your food really seriously because you make the pasta from scratch. So, I'm in.
Yeah. And actually, what's really interesting is that in that example, I think that seems like it was more powerful than if they showed you a picture of the finished pasta dish on a plate.
Yeah, well, I think sometimes you want a bit of both to be, but I agree. I think there was something about that image that immediately told the story. It immediately told me a story of pasta being made in traditional methods, as it always was, as it still is by a lot of nonnas in Italy, and it probably, I'm being very naive about this in my urban life, but it brought this whole lovely narrative of caring about ingredients and food and process to life in one picture.
That makes sense. And I think hopefully, because I don't think we haven't gone off topic, but we have been sharing lots of examples, but I really hope that this will help sort of spark everyone's creativity and imagination, and that we've spoken about at least one thing that you can now go away and do or think about, because I think we have hopefully thrown out lots and lots of ideas here. And I think something else that I'll add, if you don't mind, Cara, is I think if you're thinking about you want to do something a bit different in your business, maybe disrupt things slightly, like you said, it's not about copying other people, but just see what other people do. Kind of take notice when you buy things, like what you like and what you don't like about whether it's the ordering process or the emails you get or how the product's packaged or whatever it is. I think it's one of those things where we're all busy and it just happens. But I think if you start taking notice of that sort of thing, there's a lot you can pick up on.
Definitely. And I think if there's anything that comes to mind sooner, then that was an example of a brand that was doing it well because it stood out.
Yeah. That's true, actually. I guess you can all think back to like the last time that you were like really delighted by something that you brought. And I'm sure that hopefully for all of us, there'll be something that comes to mind right away.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a big ask as well to say really delighted. Sometimes it's just the small things. What just made you smile slightly when you were standing in the queue to buy it or when it came through on email? I think that's a great thing to aim for.
Yeah, I'd be honest, I am easily delighted. That's why I use that example.
I'm
a great customer.
If you could delight people, then brilliant. But I don't want people to feel like, oh God, what have I bought in the last month that absolutely lit me up?
Not everyone will be as easily impressed as I am. I do understand that. It doesn't take a lot.
We work in the industry, so we have a slightly atypical behavior with these things, and I'm the same. I'm like always, noticing packaging, of photographing packaging in shops and, looking like quite a weirdo. But yeah, definitely the small things, even to the most hardened consumer, they will still register a part of your brand in a way that others aren't.
And I guess it all ties back to just helping you stand out, which I guess is what having your brand is about.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So that feels like a great place to wrap things up, Cara. But I do have one more question for you, if that's okay. So I think we've covered so much today, and I almost feel like this is a bit about enhancing your brand, because a lot of businesses might have thought about the visual elements. And I think that can be the thing you think about first. I know that when I worked on my very first brand, it was all about the visuals. That was really all I took into account. And then the other stuff, the values and everything else, came later. So what would your number one piece of advice be for someone who perhaps has a brand but is looking to enhance or build upon what they have so far?
Yeah, definitely. So I was thinking about this, and I would say it's revisit your about page. So if you have an about page, or if you don't have an about page, it's time to make one. And if you have your about page, but it's really hidden and it's not on the top nav, then let's change that too. We want to make it very easy for people to be able to find out a little bit more about you and your brand. But if you do have an about page, then just revisit it and see, does it cover things such as, your founder story, why your business came to life in the beginning, and by who, what solution were you trying to solve? When was it, and who was it? And a really nice way, I always love when businesses do this, is include some historic photos along the journey of your business. So if your business is, just started in the last few months, then that might not be as relevant. But if there is some story, or even some story from your past, for example, say you had a dress that you adored as a child and you tried to find one similar as an adult and couldn't, so you started designing dresses, then why not include a picture of that lovely dress that sparked it all? If your business name, one of my previous clients is a florist, and the business name is Wild Rosamond, and the client's name is not Rosamond. She's called Bridget, but actually the story is that her grandmother, Rosamond, loved the garden and was always in the garden, and a core memory for Bridget when she was growing up was spending time in the garden with her grandma. So, telling the story of your business name is really nice too. Another brand that does that well is Otto and Ivy, who I just came across actually through a podcast as well. And their name, so they make shoes for larger feet, and their name Otto is 8 in Latin, and Ivy because it grows tall. So 8 representing a large women's shoe size, which is their starting size, and Ivy representing, elegant and tall. It makes complete sense to me. So basically, if you can explain how you came about, if there is a story behind your business and your brand name, then share it. If you've got any photos of the process, then share it. And do have your values on there too, and make sure that they are underpinned. Make sure that your values feel like things that are authentic to your business and things that you can make actual commitments in the way you do things.
That's amazing. Thank you. And Cara, I know you have loads of resources that will be really helpful to small businesses. Is there anything you would like us to go and look at first? What would you suggest if people want a little bit of support?
Yeah, so I am actually working on creating a lot of resources in this area because it's something that I get asked a lot. So I have a website, brandingmadesimple.co.uk, or if you go to carabendon.com, it's on the shop tab. And there you can find templates and tools of things that I have used with one-on-one clients. And I'm working on one at the moment, which is going to help you work out your values. And I'm really pleased with it actually, because not to sound smug, but it's something that I think I worked on my values. I reassessed them about a year and a half ago when I rebranded, and it was a really useful exercise for me to do. And it actually gave me a lot of clarity in what content I should be putting out, and the way some certain business decision. So I think it's really good, and I'm all for basically helping businesses create values that feel true to them rather than just platitudes that they feel that they must have. And then that immediately communicates a lot of your brand personality and cares as well. So yeah, I'd say that would be a great one to start with.
Amazing. And they're available on your shop?
Yeah, they are on my shop, on my website. So it's brandingmadesimple.co.uk, or on the shop tab of my main website. I believe we could put the links in the show notes.
Oh, we will definitely put in the links.
Brilliant. And I have an offer as well. So for I love this podcast. I think it's a fantastic resource and I love listening to it personally. So for all listeners, I've got an anytime offer of 20% off on all of the templates with the code Vicky20 as well.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. That's so kind of you, Cara. So that's Vicky with an I, everyone, if you want to use that offer. But we will also put the details in the show notes. And of course, if you have any questions about the code or anything else, then do feel free to reach out as well.
Brilliant.
And thank you so much for being here again, Cara.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to have a lovely conversation with you about this, something I'm very passionate about.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening right to the end of this episode. Do remember that you can get the full back catalogue and lots of free resources on my website, vickyweinberg.com. Please do remember to rate and review this episode if you've enjoyed it, and also share it with a friend who you think might find it useful. Thank you again, and see you next week. If you've been inspired to start a podcast in 2024, I really recommend my podcast host, Captivate. Captivate were my top pick when I started podcasting 4 years ago because of how easy it was for a complete novice like me to get started. I've stuck with them for the last 4 years because Captivate is still really simple to use. They keep adding great new features like the ability to share ads like these, and they've just been really reliable. So when you're ready to start your own podcast, you can use the link in the show notes and get a free 7-day trial with Captivate.